Dr. Isaac, respected members on the dais, and all of you in the audience. It's a great honor to take part in this event being organized by the Democratic Alliance for Knowledge Freedom, which is an organization, as I understand, at the intersection between IT and knowledge work on the one hand, and civil liberties, democratic rights, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of the media on the other. And I think perhaps one of the triggers for the DAKF holding this important seminar today and choosing a title or theme of freedom of expression and freedom after expression is the recent attack, reprehensible and still ongoing, on a news portal called NewsClick. One of its founders, Prabir Purkayastha, and over 50 other journalists, writers, comedians, other individuals associated with it. As The Wire and others have chronicled, not just in India but abroad, the steady decline in day-to-day freedom. Of course, freedom of press, but also virtually every other freedom that is guaranteed by the Constitution. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of association. The freedom of students and faculty members to exercise their autonomy and spirit of free thinking in institutions of higher education. All of this is under challenge. And the standard response has been by those who still want to bury their heads in the sand and pretend, as Narendra Modi said in Texas, ki sab changa hai, everything is fine. The standard response has been to point to the emergency of 1975 to 77 and say, well, things are not that bad. That was dictatorship. That was authoritarianism. That was when India experienced, or Indians experienced, the violation of their fundamental rights on a mass scale. Today, there is nothing similar or comparable to that episode. This is the standard response. And to them, I would say, and that's what makes today's event so special, because the trigger is the attack on NewsClick and the arrest of Prabir Purkayastha. That Prabir Purkayastha is the first person I know. Perhaps there are others. But the first person I know who had the misfortune of being targeted and arrested during the emergency of Indira Gandhi, when as a student at Jawaharlal Nehru University, he was swept up in a mass arrest, and I think he spent more than a year or two in jail for terrorist crimes. And Prabir has been arrested under this law a law which has been drafted in such a way that it is very, very difficult for you to get bail. Certainly, lower courts never grant bail. Even the high courts are reluctant. Whenever bail is granted, finally, it's up to the Supreme Court, and you know how long this process can take. Our colleague, fellow journalist Sidhart Varadarajan, spent 2 years in prison as somebody arrested under UAPA for journalism that he had not even been able to do, because he was arrested on his way to Hathras to report on the gang rape and murder of a young Dalit woman. So, when people say things are not as bad as the emergency, I say you're wrong. And here is exhibit number 1, Prabir Purkayastha. Jailed then, jailed now. And if the Supreme Court does not assert itself, if the Supreme Court or the higher judiciary does not stand up and defend freedom of the press as guaranteed and enshrined in our Constitution, I am fairly certain, and it pains me to say this, that we could well be looking at the passage of a year, 2 years, maybe even more, before somebody like Prabir Purkayastha is released on bail. The cases will linger forever. We have before us not just Sidhart Varadarajan's example. So, to all those who say this is not emergency, I say, please tell me, what is Prabir Purkayastha doing in jail as a terrorist? But there is a more fundamental point that we need to understand, and this brings me to the heart of the topic today, freedom of expression and freedom after expression. And I'm speaking specifically with regard to the media, which is the arena I know best. That at the heyday of the emergency, what the media was subjected to was a system of pre-censorship, where stories before they were published had to be vetted by a government censor before they could be published. Which is, you could say, quite an extreme form of censorship. It's also quite inefficient. And in today's day and age, when you have so many different channels, so many different newspapers with multiple editions, you have internet websites, it's not even possible for the most authoritarian state, for the most tyrannical state, to engage in a comprehensive system of pre-censorship, where each and every story before it is published has to be vetted by somebody in government. It's not possible. Every day, millions of words are published, millions of images, and minutes and hours of footage are published. So, how does an authoritarian react to this challenge that technology has presented? The authoritarian reacts by creating a system of post-publication repression. What Idi Amin, this is the apocryphal expression attributed to Idi Amin Dada of Uganda, when he denied that there was any repression in Uganda. And he said, no, in Uganda we guarantee freedom of speech. And then he whispered, we cannot guarantee that there's freedom after speech. And this, friends, is the system in India, that there is freedom of expression for everybody. There is freedom of press. But is there going to be freedom for you after expression, after you publish something? This is the fear and question mark that Narendra Modi and his colleagues have thrust upon the media, and this is their method of control. And believe me, this is equally, if not more effective, as a method of terrorizing journalists than anything that Indira Gandhi could have devised or implemented during the emergency that she ran. You just have to look at the media landscape today, with virtually all TV channels, at least national TV channels, those that broadcast with their headquarters in Delhi or Noida, in English or Hindi. Virtually all of these channels are today, in one way or the other, to a greater or lesser degree, platforms that serve the government's interest. Some do it very blatantly. Some go even beyond the brief that the government may have given them. Many of them openly espouse religious hatred and communal and encourage communal polarization. Many of them believe that the task of a journalist is to target and hector and question aggressively those who are critics of the government, opposition, for example, or social activists. In my book, the media should not offer a free pass to anybody, whether government or opposition, but to suggest that your most aggressive questioning and all your investigative work must be trained and focused on the opposition, while the government, which is responsible for 90% of what happens in this country, is given a free pass. That is not journalism. But that is what passes for journalism when it comes to the Noida channels, the big English and Hindi news channels, including the channel which has now been bought by Mr. Adani. NDTV has now joined. This was perhaps the one channel that was resisting this trend, and today even this channel has gone over to the dark side. So we have freedom of expression, but when you ask, is there freedom after expression? Is there freedom of the press after you publish something? The answer to that question is, depends who you are and what you say. Which side of the fence are you on? Are you with us? Are you with them? And actually, if you're not with us, the presumption is that you are with them. So, media that is critical of what the government is doing, but which is not connected to the opposition in any way, is automatically labeled by those in power as the enemy. And enemies, you see, they come in all shapes and sizes. And given the nature of the mass media today, and since this is a meeting organized by the DAKF, you're familiar with the way in which social media dynamics have affected the nature and flow and velocity of information. So, a dictatorial-minded leader who wants to control the narrative has to ensure that he is able to control or put pressure on not just reporters or editors or the companies they work for, but also on the nodes or methods of distribution. In Tamil Nadu and Punjab, two states, I'm talking now of 10 years ago, before the internet revolution really caught on. In these two states, Political parties had TV channels and they also had the cable network to distribute. And what would they do if the government changed? They would use their control over the cable network to make sure that the other guy's channels are not shown. So, an integral part of controlling the media is to control how the media's message is distributed. In the case of TV, today you have a very direct control, right? Which is the Broadcast Act mandates that every channel that wants to broadcast, do a terrestrial broadcast, has to get a license. India has dozens, if not hundreds, of news channels. Many people, despite it not being a very profitable business, many people would still like to set up new channels. But to the best of my knowledge, the last channel that got permission was Republic TV. And that was maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago. I know that Raghav Behel wanted to set up a Bloomberg Quint channel. He made all his investments, built his studio, assuming that this was just a formality. No permission came. Plan was abandoned. Sometimes when there is a channel with pre-existing permission, which the government doesn't like, it tries to block or cancel or withdraw that license, as we saw in the case of Media One in Kerala, where no reasons were given. This bogey of national security was raised. Nothing was shared with the channel itself. No specific or great details were shared with the court either. And yet it took many months and the intervention of the Supreme Court finally before this great injustice and attack on media freedom was reversed. When it comes to the technology of today, which is digital, the primary methods of distribution of news is, of course, internet, but you do that through the use of different platforms, which are called social media intermediaries. So you have Facebook, you have Twitter, you have Instagram, you have YouTube. Google plays its role through search. So the government, in order to be able to put pressure, knows that it's not enough to terrorize or scare a reporter or an editor or a news platform. You have to also put pressure on the social media intermediaries. You have to make sure, and I'll give you details of how this control is exercised. But an integral part of the strategy of this government is to use the law, specifically the information technology rules, IT rules of 2021, to put pressure on not just news platforms, digital news platforms, but on the social media intermediaries. And the effects of that are evident before us. Sometimes it's not enough to scare Google or Twitter, because these are big companies, and even though their track record is not very good in terms of actually standing up for freedom of expression, and these are large companies that look after their profits, and if they sense that access to the Indian market will be compromised if we don't cooperate with Narendra Modi, then they will choose the path of cooperation with Modi. But they don't always do that. So the system goes to the next mile. If we have done a story, or there's a discussion on a certain topic which you're not able to prevent, you're not able to get Twitter to delete, You're not able to get YouTube to delete. What do? You then get your police to file cases against individual social media users. How many times have you read stories of a man in Uttar Pradesh arrested because he liked a post that somebody had put on Facebook, which was a caricature of Yogi Adityanath? Or how somebody in Gujarat got arrested because they said something critical or derogatory about the chief minister. You've all heard about the case of Jignesh Mevani from a few years ago. Jignesh Mevani, of course, is not an ordinary social media person. He's an MLA from Gujarat. But he put out a tweet 2 or perhaps 3 years ago, highly critical of Narendra Modi, where he described Narendra Modi as a follower of Nathuram Godse. Now, I don't know if this allegation of Modi being a follower of Godse is true or not. But if, let's assume that it's not correct, and let us assume that Mr. Modi feels that in the eyes of his followers, he has been defamed by this allegation, then Indian civil law gives him the remedy of filing a defamation case. In fact, Indian law gives him the remedy also of a criminal defamation case. But it's up to the person who is supposedly defamed to take action. He doesn't do that. He doesn't even issue a statement. Instead, you have the Assam police flying all the way across the country, landing in Gujarat, arresting Mr. Mevani, taking him back, and booking him under various serious offenses because some BJP member in Assam, which is a BJP-ruled state, some BJP member in Assam filed a police complaint, frivolous police complaint, that Mevani's statement had hurt his feelings, that this is an inflammatory statement, that it is an insurrectionary statement. I don't know, I forget the precise charges that were filed against Jignesh. And he was held in custody for 2 or 3 days before finally a lower court granted him bail and allowed him to go back. Now, if this can happen to an MLA, simply for a tweet, you can imagine what fate can lie before ordinary people. And actually, the purpose of this kind of heavy-handedness is to choke off the public appetite to read, to share, to contribute to discussions online that are critical of the government. Can you believe that in Uttar Pradesh this week, the Adityanath government has arrested people? I was reading in the paper today or yesterday. One gentleman, so the Adityanath apparently said that there shall be no comments on Israel-Palestine that are not in line with what the government of India's position is. Now, frankly, the government of India has not even stated its position. Or what it has stated is so brief that it's impossible to get any sense of what the position is. For example, it used to be a regular statement of India whenever there was violence or crisis that India would call for a ceasefire. India would urge restraint, that no matter what the origin of the violence, as the Prime Minister said about Ukraine and Russia, and he was applauded around the world for saying it, this is not an era of war. But if today you put a post in Uttar Pradesh that Narendra Modi told Ukraine and Russia that this is not an era of war, why doesn't he tell the same thing to Netanyahu? Will such a tweet pass Adityanath's test? That this is in conformity with the government of India's position? Or will some enthusiastic policeman decide that no, this is inflammatory? Of course, a lot depends on your religion. The one person I know who has been arrested happens to be Muslim, and that doesn't surprise me. But this is the nature of illegality and capriciousness which has been introduced into the entire domain of freedom of speech in this country. That you do not know whether something you say online or in a meeting can tomorrow be turned into a criminal case against you. A young colleague of mine at The Wire went to Rampur in 2020 or 21 to report on the death of a farmer who had died during the farmers' protest in Delhi on January 26th that year. The farmers claimed that this farmer had died, young farmer, he was 26 or 27, that he died because of a bullet injury. The Delhi police said, no, he died because of the tractor he was on overturned. Fine, you can have two versions. And we don't know which is correct, which is not. But merely for interviewing the grandfather of the dead farmer, where the grandfather says, I do not believe the police, I think my grandson was shot dead. My reporter gets an FIR lodged against her by the Rampur police. That's where the farmer's family lived. Accusing her of inciting communal hatred. Accusing her of spreading rumors with a view to inciting insurrection against the government. What kind of ridiculous charges are these? And you put these charges on, you file these FIRs, even as you know that this will never go to trial. In fact, you hope it never goes to trial, the police, because they know that then police, any sensible judge will laugh at them or even accuse them of malicious prosecution. But they know that filing a case means tying the reporter down, tying the organization down in years and years of endless tariq pe tariq, going to court, all this nonsense. And the system also hopes that this will have a deterrent effect, that other reporters will think 100 times before they write something that the police does not approve of. My colleague in Srinagar, Jahangir Ali, who is a very fine reporter, did a detailed story quoting from documents that were released by a civil servant, accusing the Jammu Kashmir administration, which is now under the control of the central government, of irregularities in the way in which one of the health insurance schemes was being implemented. Instead of responding to the questions that we asked before publication and giving their version, or even instead of sending a letter to the editor or a complaint or some kind of reply to us after we published, saying that on behalf of the government that we think your story is wrong and please carry our version. And no media will not want to carry the government's version if they are responding to something you've published. Instead of following this route, you have the Lieutenant Governor of J&K, Manoj Sinha, at a public rally, slandering my colleague and calling him as a member of separatist ecosystem. Do you know what that means in Jammu Kashmir? When you accuse a reporter of being a separatist or of being anti-India, you are painting a target on his back. You are signaling to the police that this fellow is a bad fellow, go after him. And this is not speculation on my part. You have reporters in Kashmir, since we are speaking of freedom after expression, you have reporters and editors in Kashmir who are regularly summoned to the police station every time they do a story that is critical of the government, critical of the police, or critical of the army. The other day, we carried an interview, The Wire carried an interview of A.S. Dullat, former chief of RAW, former chief of IB. He's the only man, only police officer in this country to have headed both of the intelligence agencies. And my colleague Karan Thapar interviews Dullat on one of the encounters which took place in Kashmir recently, a couple of months ago. And you would think that Dullat knows what he's talking about. At any rate, you cannot question his motivations. And after the interview is published, the Inspector General of Police sends me a notice that what Dullat has said on the Wire's platform is demoralizing the security forces and so on and so forth. Implication being that you should never have published that interview and don't publish it, don't carry this kind of stuff again. Of course, we replied to him saying that you are nobody to tell us. According to the constitution of this country, the police is not an arbiter for what can be published or not published. The constitution guarantees freedom of speech and freedom of the press, subject to a very narrow set of restrictions which are all linked to actual laws. And in the case of my colleague also, who was slandered by the LG, I wrote a letter to the LG yesterday, saying that this is unbecoming of a lieutenant governor to target journalists like this. But this is the atmosphere that has been created today. Can you imagine that a representative body like the Editors Guild of India goes to Manipur to do a fact-finding mission, produce a fact-finding report on the role of the media in the ongoing ethnic violence. And they came back and produced a report which was very critical of sections of the local press. This should not surprise us because we know from experience. We know that in Gujarat 2002. We know that in Uttar Pradesh in the 1990s. We know that in Delhi in 1984. Mass media, a section of mass media played a role in fomenting violence, in inciting hatred. We are not saying that all these newspapers or editors were guilty of a crime, but we are saying that somewhere down the line, as journalists, we have the responsibility to chronicle the failures of our profession. So the Editors Guild goes to Manipur, criticizes some of the journalism or reporting that was done by the local press. They come back to Delhi and they find that the Manipur police files a criminal case against the members of the Editors Guild team. So now it's not just the reporter or the editor or the website of somebody who is critical, but if a neutral fact-finding body which goes from outside to look into something, even they can now become a target. And of course, filing an FIR in Manipur under the circumstances today means that you actually don't have any prospect of legal defense. Because lawyers who have represented individuals accused of criticizing the government or the chief minister or some organizations linked to the majority community there, lawyers who have tried to defend these people have been attacked, their houses have been attacked, and no lawyer is prepared to defend. So my colleagues from the Editors Guild went to Supreme Court and said, you need to intervene. Matter is still pending, and I'm confident that the Supreme Court will say that this kind of persecution of a fact-finding mission is not allowed. Two, three other points I want to make before I close. We should not assume that the pressure on freedom of expression that is being exerted on NewsClick or on other reporters or our colleagues in Kashmir, that this is confined to the press. I would say that there is a broad spectrum of creative activity today where certain kind of expression is not allowed, and of course other kinds of expression, no matter how wrong it is, no matter how ill-informed it is, no matter how dangerous it is in reality, that is actually encouraged and given tax breaks. You have the film Kerala Story before you. You have Kashmir Files, stories which tell a very particular kind of narrative. Frankly, I don't think that film should be banned. It's much rather that people watch these movies and decide. And invariably, sometimes these films succeed, sometimes they don't. It's not healthy to, in our kind of societies, to empower a CBFC with the right to ban movies, or certainly politicians should not have that right. But today, if you are a filmmaker making a certain kind of movie, chances are that your film will never be shown in the way that you would like it to be. Even though the content, by any objective standard, would be far less objectionable to what the CBFC allows when it comes to films like Kashmir Files or Kerala Story. There is a movie that was made last year, which has still not been shown, called Punjab 95, a film based on the life of Jaswant Singh Khalra, who was a human rights activist in Punjab in the 1990s, who documented the manner in which young Sikh men who were not connected to any Khalistan movement or terrorist movement or militant movement, how they were systematically picked up and killed and their bodies burnt in cremation grounds without any records being maintained. And Khalra went meticulously, along with his team, looked at the crematoria records, and was able to come up with a list of young men who had been disappeared in this way. It was phenomenal forensic human rights work that he did in 93, 94, 95. And then in 95, the man who was investigating the disappearances of others himself disappears. Because the Punjab police realized that this guy is a threat, and so they disappeared him, killed him. Later, some Punjab police were arrested. In fact, some of them are still in jail for this crime. And a filmmaker has made a movie on the story of Khalra. The film was meant to be shown, it was meant to have its debut, premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival earlier this year. At the last minute, it is withdrawn. The CBFC reviewed the film and is demanding all kinds of cuts. And the filmmaker is in a quandary. Should he appeal? Should he accept? If he appeals, is there any guarantee that the integrity of the film will be restored? Because he does not have the same clout as filmmakers who are on this side of the regime. So movie makers are feeling the heat. Authors, scholars, university people. You saw what happened to the freedom of scholarship of economist Sabyasachi Das at Ashoka University when he did a research paper on the possibility of the 2019 election result having been manipulated in some constituencies. And he finally was subjected to pressure. He resigned. And today, I'm sure the net effect of this is that scholars will think 100 times about the kind of topics they take up, about what kind of research they do, because nobody wants to meet the same fate as Sabyasachi Das. Comedians either have their shows cancelled, like Kunal Kamra often has to face, or they can end up in jail, as Munawar Farooqi experienced. This is the reality, that across the board, freedom after expression is no longer a guarantee in this country. Whether you're press, whether you're a professor, whether you're a student, whether you are a comedian, whether you're a singer, whether you're a poet, a filmmaker, there is a zone of uncertainty that has been created, a fear, an atmosphere, a climate of fear that is created as to what are the bounds of permissibility. And you know who decides what the boundaries are? It's the police. So it's entirely up to the police now to decide when a certain play or a certain movie or a certain book can be deemed worthy of an FIR, and then you take action against the person. A cartoon, a tweet. I will close just with an observation about the IT rules, because this is, after all, a DAKF platform. But the government came up with IT rules 2 years ago. Of course, there is a stay both from the Kerala High Court and Bombay High Court on parts of the IT rules. But the logic of what the government is trying to do should be very clear to all of you. Under the guise of allowing readers to share their grievances or to air their grievances against news organizations, and every reader can have a complaint or a grievance. My first job as a journalist was to look after the letters to the editor column of Times of India. And every day I would go through 200 letters of readers who were not happy with this story or that story. What the IT rules do is they have created a system to weaponize those complaints, so that news organizations are now legally obliged to respond to these complaints. And if they do not resolve them to the satisfaction of the complainant, who could be anybody, he could be a member of the BJP IT cell. If the complaint is not resolved to his or her liking, that complainant, that so-called reader, has the right to escalate the complaint all the way up to an interministerial panel of bureaucrats, people from Home Ministry and IT Ministry and so on, who will decide that this story is valid or not valid. Have you ever heard of such a thing in a democratic country? That some faceless bureaucrats will be the final judge of what is valid and what is not. And of course, if that power was not enough, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar and his colleagues have created another section of the IT rules, which is to empower the government to decide and declare what is fake news and what is not. So now you don't even need the fig leaf of some reader complaining. So, New Indian Express runs a story. Government doesn't like it. And it could be any government. It can be central government department or state government department. They don't like this news. They will issue an order saying that this is fake. That's it. And that designated fake news, the social media intermediaries are then obliged to take it down. So Twitter, YouTube have to then act based on what the government is ordering them to do. So tomorrow, Arundhati Roy may write another one of her fine essays where she speaks of a nexus between Narendra Modi and various crony capitalists. And the Home Ministry or the Finance Ministry may decide, no, this is fake. And they say this is fake news. and the order will then go out to YouTube to take down her video, go to Twitter, remove the link to the speech or the article she wrote. This is the kind of censorship regime that Mr. Narendra Modi has introduced in India. I began with the reference to the old emergency and the question of comparing it to the new. The old emergency was to censor something before it is printed. The new system is because you cannot, the volume of publication is too much for you to censor before anything is printed. But you have fully empowered the state and the police to set boundaries for what is allowed and what is not allowed. And journalists, writers, poets, artists, filmmakers, curators, actors, they all have to guess where is the boundary. Where is that Lakshman Rekha that if I cross, tomorrow there will be an FIR against me? Where is that FIR? Where is that boundary which if I cross, they may send enforcement directorate after me? You know, the Financial Times has run 2 stories talking about documents which any sensible government would say we need to investigate this because what these documents show is the illicit transfer out of India of millions of dollars. This is what the ED is meant to be investigating. The Enforcement Directorate was made for this. The Prevention of Money Laundering Act was made for this. But you will not investigate documents which suggest that hundreds or thousands of crores of rupees are involved in coming and going, involving some of India's biggest companies. That you won't investigate. Maybe because those businesses are they are within your ecosystem. But journalists or others who question you, the ED can go after them. The CBI can go after them. The Delhi Police Special Cell can go after them, like they have done for NewsClick. And just so that there's no confusion in your mind, the issue is not of any financial law breaking. What are the questions that these reporters or others were asked? What coverage did you do of farmers' movement? What coverage have you been doing about the Citizenship Amendment Act and the protests against it? How many ground reports have you filed about the farmers? These are the kind of questions that the so-called is this the job of an anti-terrorism police squad? To ask a reporter, how many times what kind of reports did you file about the Kisan Andolan? Or to ask a journalist, why do you have these books on your bookshelf? So, the way in which the regime has gone about doing its job of stifling dissent, controlling what people can say, and the idea is to make sure that in the wider public, only your one-way transmission, your Man Ki Baat stuff, that is what will prevail. That narrative will hold. And what the Godi media, all the media that you control, the story and line and discourse that they put out, that should prevail, that should dominate. They do not want websites that challenge them, that challenge the picture that they are painting. They do not want YouTubers to do programs in Hindi or Odia or Bengali or Malayalam that ask difficult questions of those who are in power. They do not want reporters going around investigating scams or potential scams, because as they say, na khaunga, na khane dunga, lekin jaanch bhi nahi karane dunga. I won't let you investigate either. This is the regime. And it's for people to judge whether that emergency was bad or this emergency is bad, or are they just as bad or not so bad. Frankly, that's not a valid question. The question is that if we value India as a democracy, if we value the rights the Constitution has given us, there is no other conclusion but to say that we have to oppose this kind of restrictions that are being placed on us, on free speech, free media, freedom of expression, freedom of association. I once again congratulate the DAKF for having this event on this very, very important topic. And all across India, these kinds of events should be held so that people understand the full reality of what is happening. Thank you very much.